Welcome to our weekly Daf Yomi Week in Review class. I am Ben Harris, the managing editor of My Jewish Learning, sitting in this morning for my colleague Rachel Scheinerman. Thank you so much for joining us. Our presenter this week is Rabbi Elliot Goldberg, who will be guiding us through some of the weeks of the highlights of the last week of Daf Yomi study. Elliot, thanks for being with us. The floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you. Hi, everybody. It's great to see you all. Um, what we're going to focus on this week is a particular set of laws in the Talmud and some cases that the Talmud brings to discuss them. And we're going to investigate what might be a contradiction between two different sources that appear just about half a page apart from each other, and think about what sort of contradiction is there here, if at all, and how might we resolve it. So that's a little bit of a overview. We're going to jump in just a second. I'm going to plop into the chat a link to the slides I'm going to share if you want to look at them during the presentation or later. It should be all set for you to view them on your own, but I'm going to share my screen to share the text with you in just a moment as well. So you'll see it broadcast on your screen. The Talmud has been talking about property that is ownerless and how one can acquire it. In the rabbinic system, property of any kind, land objects have owners until they don't. Once something is made ownerless by the fact that it's abandoned or circumstances happen to make it ownerless, there are ways that people can gain ownership of it, mostly by picking up something that's ownerless, but sometimes there are other ways as well. The case that's been the typical one in the conversation this week is property that's owned by a convert. The convert does not have any heirs, and the convert dies, so the property is left ownerless. In the rabbinic system, unlike today, I think the assumption is that when someone converts into Judaism from a different religion, they sort of cut off ties from the community from which they come, the family from which they come, and they find themselves in the Jewish community. And if they don't create a family of their own within the Jewish community, then when they die, their property becomes ownerless. In today's world, well, we don't make those assumptions. People who convert from one religion to another usually maintain ties with friends and family from the past, and laws of inheritance are not based on your religious affiliation. There, you can still you can still pass on property to relatives you might have, heirs you might have that do not convert along with you. So the context is particularly rabbinic or Talmudic, and not something that would exactly apply today. But the case that we're talking about, the issue that the property came from a convert who didn't have heirs, isn't what's the main point of the conversation. The main point of the conversation is we have some property that winds up ownerless, and there are some ways that just people can take possession of it. So that's by way of introduction to the context of where we are. Let me share my screen and start the slides. There we go. And just going to move a couple windows around so I could see the screen. Okay, here we go. At the bottom of page 53 in Bava Batra, leading into 54, we have a teaching from Rav Yirmiyah Abira'ah, who quotes Rav Yehuda, who lets us know that while there are ways you can take possession of ownerless land, there are limits to that. And Rabbi Yirmiyah quotes Rav Yehuda saying, with regard to the one who threw turnip seeds into the crevices of the land of a convert who died without heirs, it's not sufficient to take possession. So one of the ways that we could take possession is to start to work the land. Planting crops, plowing the field is a way that someone could take possession of unoccupied land. The principle is if you start to work some land that's not owned, it becomes yours. But what Rabbi Yehuda's teaching says here is that if you merely just throw some turnip seeds into, cracks in the ground on such an unowned piece of land, that is not enough for you to take possession. What's the reason for this? Asked the Gemara. At the time that he threw the seeds, there was no enhancement to the value of the field. And now that the turnips have grown and the value of the field is enhanced, it's enhanced by itself. So the principle here that comes into play is, right, the working the land, what actually technically gives you the ownership of it when you work it is that you enhance it. If you improve a piece of property, that's one of the ways you can acquire it. But what Rabbi Yehuda here is saying, there are limits to that. There has to be some significant enhancement, some actual enhancement, and just throwing turnip seeds onto a field that they happen to fall into some cracks in the ground doesn't count. Why? Because when you throw the seeds there, it doesn't in and of itself enhance the land. And later, when the turnips grow from those seeds, it's true the value is enhanced, but because you didn't really plow the land, plant the seeds, it seems more happenstance that you threw some seeds there. The enhancement is deemed by Rabbi Yehuda to be something that happened on its own. That this act of throwing turnip seeds onto the field isn't intentional enough to make it an enhancement of the land that would make the land yours. And what this teaching comes to say is that while working the land, while enhancing the land gives you ownership of it, there are some minimum standards for it, and there are some things that you could do that don't qualify to give you ownership of the land. Following this teaching of Rabbi Yehuda, we have a series of teachings by Shmuel that tries to look at questionable cases to figure out, is the action performed by the person enough to enhance the land? And if so, they gain possession of it, or is it something that's not sufficient to do that? And Shmuel gives us a series of tests about a number of scenarios to say, well, let's take a look at this and figure out what's really going on here. We're going to dig deep into just one of them. And here it is. Shmuel says, with regard to this one who cuts the branches off a palm tree, if he had in mind the acquisition of the palm tree, he has acquired it. But if he had in mind the benefit of the animals, meaning to feed his animals the branches, he has not acquired it. So what's Shmuel talking about here? We have an unowned palm tree, and a person cuts down branches off the palm tree. Shmuel says, well, cutting down branches off a palm tree might be enough to gain ownership of the tree, and it might not be. And the issue isn't whether or not you actually cut the branches off the tree, it's what you cut the branches off the tree for. Meaning, what matters is not the specific action, but what you mean by doing that action. So on one hand, Shmuel says, if you cut some branches off the tree, it's a means of trimming the tree, improving the tree so that you will take possession of and be able to harvest from it later. That's sufficient for you to gain ownership of the tree. But if you're cutting some branches off the tree and you're going to use it for animal feed, that is not seen as an enhancement of the tree. And therefore, if that's your purpose in cutting branches off the tree, you haven't acquired possession of the tree. What's interesting here is the action that you do is the same in both cases. You cut branches off the tree, but it's what you have in mind when you do it that makes the difference. So the Gemara asks, Heichi Dami, what are the circumstances of this case? Or what are the circumstances? How do we know what's going on in the mind of the person when they cut the branches off the tree to make a determination? Because if we watch you cut branches off a palm tree, It's hard to know what's in your mind. And if someone comes to challenge your ownership, it's hard to determine just from the fact that you cut branches off the tree if you meant to acquire the tree, or if you're just cutting off the branches because you need the branches to feed your animals. And in and of itself, your own testimony later in court might not be sufficient to prove your case. The Gemara wants to know, how can we know what the person has in their mind? And here's what they say. The Gemara's response is, well, it matters how you cut the tree, how you cut the branches from the tree. If you took branches from this side and from that side, that means you had in mind to acquire the tree, because trimming branches all around the tree assists in the growth of the tree. Meaning if you thin the branches all over the tree, right, from 360 degrees around, you're trimming off the branches that are smaller or weaker. You're trimming out certain branches so they don't overcrowd the tree, so the bigger ones can grow. That's a sign that you're cultivating the tree in a way that will promote more dates to grow, and that your intention is to then take possession of the tree. But if the branches you took were from all one side of the tree, that shows that you had in mind that you were just going to feed your animals with the branches. Excuse me. So what the Gemara differentiates from, since we can't actually differentiate what's in your mind, we can differentiate by looking at how it is you cut the tree. If you just are lopping off branches all from one side, so the tree's uneven and not in a way that's the best practices for cultivating a palm tree, that says you're just using the branches to feed your animals, and you're looking for a quick way to get feed for them, and doesn't count. But if you carefully select branches from one place or another and you trim the tree in a way that promotes its growth, that's actually an enhancement of the tree. And then we could say your intention was to acquire the tree and it becomes yours. So what's interesting is in the first case, Rabbi Yehuda says there's a limit below which, right, just throwing seeds into a field of turnips isn't enough to acquire the tree. It's got to be, to acquire the land, it's got to be more than that. Here, Shmuel is saying, well, we could have someone who just cuts branches off the tree. It might count, it might not count. It depends upon how they cut it, since we can't know what's in their mind. So that's case number two. Shmuel brings a lot of cases similar to this one, where there's a situation where you're doing some action, and depending on what your intention is, you might acquire the property, you might not. And after the series of Shmuel's teaching, we have an actual incident that's reported about palm trees, which is why I brought this incident from Shmuel. And it goes as follows. There was a certain woman who profited from an ownerless palm tree by cutting its branches for 13 years. So we have a woman who profited. There's an ownerless palm tree, and she cut its branches for 13 years and was able to earn some profit from that. And then another came and plowed beneath it a bit. So the woman's been cutting branches off the tree for 13 years. Another person came, plows the land around the tree, and plowing around the tree is a way to claim the land. And so this other person, this unnamed person, takes a step to make a bid for the land, which this woman has been profiting from by cultivating its branches, or trimming its branches for 13 years. The case comes to court before Levi, and some says before Mar Ukva. We're not sure, where there are two different traditions about who is the judge in the case. And whichever rabbi it was, they established the property in possession of the one who plowed the land. So this woman's been cultivating the tree for 13 years. Someone comes, plows it. She gets upset, goes to court. Maybe they have a conflict and the other person takes it to court. And the ruling is the person who plowed the land under the tree gets possession. The woman comes and shouted before him, meaning the judge, Levi or Mar Ukva, protesting the perceived injustice of the ruling, meaning she's been cultivating the tree for 13 years. She's been trimming its branches. She's been taking, the dates that come off of it. It seems that she has done what Shmuel stipulated before, where she wasn't just using it to feed her animals. She was cultivating the tree. She was enhancing the tree. She was doing it for 13 years, and she loses the property. Mar Ukva says to her, this text follows the second version of who the person was. What can I do for you as you did not take possession in the proper manner that people take possession of property? Oh, sorry about that. Mar Ukva says, yeah, I hear you. I hear that you've been working this tree for 13 years, but you didn't leave me any choice here. You don't really have any ground to stand on. You didn't take possession of the tree in the manner that people do that actually do this. Meaning, Mar Ukva in this case says, in order to take possession of a tree, harvesting from the tree isn't enough. You actually have to plow the land around the tree, which is the reason why he rules against the woman and in favor of this newcomer who, after 13 years of the woman working the tree, plows the land between it. So now we have here a story that comes after these teachings of Shmuel that says something different than what Shmuel taught before. Shmuel taught that, right, if you cut the branches of the tree carefully in a way that shows that you're working the tree, you're trying to enhance it, that you want to, that's a sign that you're taking ownership of the tree. It seems to me, anyways, from this read that this woman has a case. She's been working this tree and profiting from it for 13 years. Doesn't seem right that this person could just come and plow the land and take the tree. So what's going on here? Might be a couple different things. What's interesting is the Gemara doesn't raise an issue between this story and Shmuel's teaching. But when I saw these two texts really close together, it struck me that, hey, someone should have asked a question about this between the two. So one possibility which happens in the Talmud frequently is what the rabbis call maseh listor, a anecdote that comes to contradict a piece of a rabbinic teaching or legislation that's before. It could be that Shmuel comes and has this teaching that says, well, cutting the branches of a tree in a way that shows that you're trying to groom the tree means you should have it. And this is a way to show that actually the rule doesn't follow Shmuel. That Mar Ukva or Levi, who rule in this case, disagree with Shmuel. And while the woman has been working the tree for 13 years, she did not actually acquire it in a way that she needed to acquire it. And actually what she did by just cutting the branches from the tree and profiting from them was similar to throwing the turnip seeds into the cracks in the ground, just tossing them on the land, not sufficient to gain the property. That's one possible read here that says this story comes to contradict the teaching of Shmuel before and to show that these rabbis disagree, and that should not be the case. That's one possibility. Possibility number two, as I looked at this story, this might just show an injustice, and this might be a story about gender and power. And reading it through a feminist lens, this shows how here a woman who cultivated the tree for 13 years loses out in the court systems to another who came and plowed the land beneath it. And from the gender of in the text, another who came is referred to as male. And this might be a case of, we know women don't have the same property rights in the rabbinic system. This might be a case where the judges in the system rule in favor of the man who came and plowed the land beneath the tree, even though the woman had been working the tree for 13 years. But it's just a story that shows an injustice in the system where we might say, she doesn't have the standing or the power in the society to stand up and say, hey, you just took my tree from me, give it back. And the judge is here saying, no, thanks. Actually, we're going to give it to the person who plowed the land and not to you who worked it for 13 years. And it might be a story that is evidence of that sort of legal injustice and the different equality of access to power in the court systems based on gender. Not something raised by the commentators, but as a modern reader of the text, something to see that's here that potentially we might want to shout out about this text and maybe shout out with the woman who protested the injustice of getting her tree taken away, given that she had worked it for all those years, and it seemed that this newcomer maybe doesn't merit. A third possibility is to go back to the original language and see what's there, because the stories that we've looked at here rely on the translations and from taken this translation taken from Safaria from the Steinsatz's English translation, And I just want to go back to the original text and compare the two versions, which might offer a different explanation about why these two stories are different. So the first story, it says, Amar Shmuel. Shmuel says, Hi man de Pashach Ikla. This is right with regard. There was a person with regard to a person who cuts the branches of a palm tree. Right, I highlighted in yellow the verb in Hebrew, pashach, which has been translated here as cuts. It's a good translation. Dikla is the word for palm tree. So this is a case. The case we read is the case of someone who cut branches of the palm tree. If we look at the story of the woman, where the English that we saw before said, but she profited by cutting. Here we see the verb says, Hayi itada. Here there's a woman, de achla dikla betavshicha, that she profited from a palm tree by cutting, which is the translation we saw before. So the second verb there in the Hebrew, tavshicha, is cutting. It's the same verb as before, so it's referring to the same action, except there's a second verb attached to it, which was translated as profited. If you see there the verb, the root aleph, chaf, lamed, achal, if you're familiar with Hebrew and Aramaic, you might know that it could mean profit, right? We talk a lot in a lot of the Talmud, we see this verb achal means to profit from, but we also know the word achal can mean to eat, right? If you eat from a tree, it's similar to profiting from a tree, right? You eat from crops, you profit from crops. There's a connection made that this verb is used in both ways in the text. But it's possible that we could say here that what did she do? She ate from the tree by cutting down its branches for 13 years, as opposed to profited from it, meaning literally what's the story about? There's a woman who saw an unknown tree and she cut off some branches and she took down the dates and she ate them from those branches, and she did so for 13 years. What's the difference if this word here means, if the intention is ate instead of profited? Potentially, going back to Shmuel's case, the difference between the verbs might be the difference between her intention and her mind. That she intended not to cultivate and enhance the tree to make it her own, but just to eat from it. And the profit she got by eating from it was she got the food. The woman ate from the tree for 13 years, but in eating from the tree, she just received its fruit, which was okay because the tree was ownerless and so was its fruit. But she did not enhance the tree in a way that made her the owner of that tree. Possibly we could see a hint of that in the language, and that's what the later legal commentators say about this text, where they actually codify both Shmuel's text and this story into the law by saying there are certain ways you can acquire a tree, and one is by trimming its branches in a way that cultivates the tree. One is plowing the land under it, but merely eating from the tree is not sufficient to gain possession of it. And they take that from this story and maybe a stricter read or a more limited read of what it means that when we say this woman, da'achla digla tafshicha, that she ate from the tree, but she didn't acquire ownership. And while she thought she owned the tree, she in fact did not. And that's why Bar Ukva says to her, listen, you didn't do anything, you didn't do something sufficient enough to say that you became the owner of the tree, and I'm forced to give it to the person who plowed the land, not because I think that person necessarily deserves it, but you didn't take any of the legal actions that you could have done to actually make this your tree, which would have been not just cutting down the fruit to eat it, but cultivating the tree or plowing the land underneath it. And so perhaps these two stories are not coming to contradict one another, but coming to sharpen our understanding of the law. And in fact, they both teach us a nuanced detail, and at least that's how the legal commentators see that in their commentary and what gets codified into Jewish law. All right. That's a snippet from the text we saw this week. I see a number of you have chimed in while I was presenting, wondering questions, comments from the crowd. If you raise your hand with your hand raise button, you'll pop up to the front of the screen and we can let you ask a question or give your comment. All right, Claudette, I'm gonna.
Hello, Rabbi. Thank you for this morning.
Sure.
Is it possible that today a convert can equate their estate to a relative that is not Jewish, but in the past, it had to do with the land, and the land would move away from a Jewish person to a non-Jewish person?
Well, there are lots of differences today, right? Inheritance laws within the Jewish laws of inheritance don't apply. They fall under the category of right, dina de malchuta dina. We follow the laws of the land. So Jewish law says today, for inheritance purposes, we follow whatever the civil regulations are in the place that we live. But I hear what you're saying. Some of this might have to do with the fact that we're talking about land, right? I'll step back a few steps, right? Some of the central to the covenant between the Jewish people and God and the Torah is the acquisition of the land of Israel. And in the book of Joshua, the land is divided up between families, and so the biblical system sort of sees this eternal gift of the land to particular families. And the rabbis are sensitive to that, right? We touched on at different times in our journey through Daf Yomi, the laws of Yovel, right? The 50th Jubilee year where land reverts back to its original family that owned it originally. So there might be something here about not wanting land to be passed, Jewish land to be sold outside of the Jewish people. And that might be why, in particular, we're dealing with a case here of a convert who has no heirs. I think the implication is has no Jewish heirs, and that land becomes ownerless because they don't want the land to be inherited outside the Jewish people to preserve the Jewish ownership of the land. I think that's definitely a theme in the rabbinic texts in terms of preserving Jewish independence, Jewish ownership of the land in Israel. What's interesting, though, is that the people who are having the conversation today in the text I quoted are Babylonian rabbis. I wonder if they're thinking about it back in the original context from the land of Israel, or might be applying it to Babylonia, where that particular issue or sensitivity to them might not be the same in terms of land ownership, because ownership of land in Babylonia doesn't have the same covenantal or religious nuance to it. It's it's just where the Jewish community is. But I do think you're raising something that is certainly a theme when we're dealing with land and inheritance, both in the Bible and in rabbinic texts. So thanks, Claudette.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah. We are almost out of minutes, but maybe we could take one more question or comment if somebody has. All right. Well, I'm doing that teacher thing where you count in your head for 5 seconds. I double it a little on Zoom to give people a chance to unmute or raise their hand and process it through. Coming up soon, we're moving on to a new chapter in Baba Batra and some new material moving forward. Thanks everybody for being here today. And we really appreciate you joining us on a regular basis to review some things from the week in Daf Yomi. And wish you well. Have a good week, and keep on reading.
Thanks, Rabbi Goldberg. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you next time. Have a good week.